The race begins to tighten as the athletes approach the final stretch, with Shamir Little applying strong pressure from behind. The competition is no longer just about speed. It becomes a direct battle of endurance, focus, and mental strength all the way to the finish line. Every stride matters. Every hurdle clearance can change the outcome. In the end, however, there is no real uncertainty about the winner. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone powers ahead and secures a clear and decisive victory, confirming once again her dominance in the event. The latest news surrounding her performance feels almost unreal. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone has once again pushed the boundaries of human performance by breaking her own world record in the 400-meter hurdles. At the U.S. Olympic trials, she stops the clock at an astonishing 50.65 seconds. The time itself feels almost unbelievable when you consider how consistently she keeps improving. What makes it even more extraordinary is not just one record-breaking run, but the fact that she continues to surpass her own limits repeatedly, as if the concept of a ceiling simply does not apply to her. During the race dynamics, McLaughlin begins to gradually close the gap on the leading athletes. The reigning Olympic champion and current world record holder moves with controlled intensity, carefully building momentum throughout the race. Yet the question remains present in the minds of spectators. Does the younger challenger have enough energy stored for the final phase of the race? As they enter the closing meters, the tension becomes almost unbearable. The finish line approaches with extreme pressure on every athlete. Still, it is important to remember the historical context. Dalilah Muhammad has never managed to secure this particular title more than once. At the finish line moment, Muhammad narrowly edges ahead in a dramatic and tightly contested conclusion. To truly understand the significance of this rivalry, we have to go back to the 2019 World Championships, a moment that remains deeply embedded in the history of track and field. This was the stage where Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone and Dalilah Muhammad met in one of the most intense and emotionally charged 400-meter hurdles races ever recorded. The rivalry between these two athletes was not just about competition. It represented two different generations of excellence colliding on the same track. Dalilah Muhammad had already established herself as one of the most dominant figures in the sport, a proven champion with experience and confidence at the highest level. On the other hand, Sydney McLaughlin was emerging as the new force, a young athlete with raw talent, explosive speed, and the potential to redefine the event entirely. From the very beginning of the race, the energy was electric. Both athletes moved with incredible precision, maintaining near-perfect rhythm between each hurdle. Their stride patterns aligned in a way that made the race feel perfectly balanced, as if neither athlete was willing to give even a single centimeter of advantage. As they progressed through the middle section of the race, it became clear that this was not going to be a comfortable win for anyone. Entering the final stretch, the tension reached its peak. Every hurdle clearance, every landing, every acceleration phase carried enormous weight. The outcome was still completely open. Either athlete could have taken the victory depending on the smallest technical detail or moment of acceleration. In the end, Dalilah Muhammad managed to gain the slightest possible advantage. She crossed the finish line first and simultaneously set a new world record. It was not just a victory, it was a historic performance, marking her second world record of that year and confirming that she was at the absolute peak of her athletic form. Sydney McLaughlin, despite delivering a performance of exceptional quality, finished in second place. However, the significance of this moment was far deeper than a simple result sheet could show. It was not a collapse or disappointment in a traditional sense. It was a turning point that would redefine her entire future. Instead of allowing the result to discourage her, Sydney transformed the experience into fuel. That race became a psychological and emotional trigger that changed the way she approached everything in her career. It did not break her confidence. Instead, it sharpened her focus and strengthened her determination. From that moment forward, Sydney entered a completely new phase of development. She began to analyze every aspect of her performance in detail: her stride pattern, her hurdling technique, her speed endurance, and even her mental preparation before races. Training was no longer just about effort. It became about precision, structure, and long-term progression. She committed herself to relentless improvement, refusing to settle for being second best. Her new goal was not simply to compete with Dalilah Muhammad, but to surpass her completely and redefine what was possible in the 400-meter hurdles. By 2021, this transformation had already begun to show visible results. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone was no longer seen as just a rising star. She was becoming a dominant force in the sport. Her performances started to carry a different meaning. They were no longer just wins. They were statements that the competitive landscape was changing. One of the earliest major breakthroughs came at the U.S. Olympic trials. The atmosphere surrounding the event was intense, filled with anticipation and expectation. Spectators understood that something extraordinary could happen at any moment whenever she stepped onto the track. Unlike some of her earlier races where she would immediately take control from the very first meters, this time Sydney adopted a more controlled and strategic approach. She began the race with composure, focusing on efficiency rather than pure aggression. The idea was to conserve energy in the early stages so that she could unleash her maximum speed during the final phase of the race. As the race unfolded through the first 200 meters, the field remained relatively compact. Several athletes were still within striking distance, and the outcome had not yet been decided. However, Sydney's rhythm began to gradually separate her from the rest. Her hurdling technique looked effortless, each clearance smooth and controlled, with minimal loss of speed. By the time she entered the final straight, the transformation was complete. She shifted into full acceleration mode, driving forward with explosive power and maintaining perfect form under pressure. In the final 100 meters, she pulled away decisively from the rest of the field, leaving no doubt about the outcome. When she crossed the finish line, the result confirmed another elite-level performance that reinforced her growing dominance in the event. In 2022, she carried this momentum into one of the most dominant seasons ever seen in women's track and field. At the U.S. National Championships, expectations were extremely high. Fans, analysts, and fellow athletes all wanted to see whether she could push her performance even further beyond what she had already achieved. What followed exceeded expectations entirely. She delivered a breathtaking performance, stopping the clock at 51.41 seconds and setting yet another world record. The reaction from the athletics world was immediate: shock, admiration, and disbelief at how quickly she continued to evolve. Later that same year, at the World Championships, she reached an even higher level. Once again, she broke her own world record, this time running an astonishing 50.68 seconds. This performance was not just another improvement. It represented a complete rewriting of the limits of the discipline. By 2023, Sydney's dominance remained absolute. She continued to be virtually unbeatable in the 400-meter hurdles, consistently outperforming the strongest competitors in the world. What made her even more remarkable, however, was her expansion into other sprint events. She began competing in the 200-meter and flat 400-meter races, and impressively, she performed at an elite level in both. This demonstrated that her abilities were not limited to hurdling alone. Her combination of raw speed, technical precision, and adaptability made her one of the most complete and versatile athletes in modern track and field history.